Hey everyone, welcome back to What's Next, brought to you by the Circle Club. Today we're talking about Moonlight, episode 1, The Golden Problem, written by Jeremy Slater, who wrote films like Fantastic Four. He did Death Note, did some TV shows like Umbrella Academy and The Exorcist. Episode 1 is directed by Mohamed Diab, who is an Egyptian director. He hasn't done a whole ton in his catalog, but he's known for Cairo 6, 7, 8. Crazy first episode. This is getting great reception so far. Excuse me if I ramble a little concussed still. But Corey, what was your thoughts on episode 1, my man?
Yeah, I thought for a character that not a lot of people know a lot about, I thought it was a pretty good intro, right? It gave you a lot of basis for the things you needed to know, kind of who this villain is, what he's a little bit about. You have the character and understanding that he has clearly this disorder going on with him, with multiple personalities, and he has something to him, right? Obviously, they gave the little tease right at the end to his abilities, so it gives you enough there to understand generally what's going to go on with this character without giving you everything, obviously, and giving you enough to just be on the edge of your seat to come back next week.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this kind of had that feeling of low-key or maybe WandaVision where you're like, I'm giving you a baseline, not a ton, but enough so to make you kind of be like, all right, what are we going to get next week? Just to start off with some of the things that I thought were interesting, but also didn't really work. I really liked the visual stuff and elements going on. The accent, I wasn't fully buying. The British accent, there was like a lot of cliche British slang in there, but I think it kind of made sense because Steven has this alias. I felt like, he can't remember anything, but I don't know if I need to see that 3 times. And that's something that it's like, I get that they want to show that he can't remember things, but that is something I don't want to see a ton, where it's like every episode he's like, oh, I can't remember this. I can't remember this. It's like, we get it. He can't remember things. And there's going to be like reasoning behind when that happens. Like, for example, in this episode, there was 3 different ways that he forgot, and it showed that time had passed differently. One was just like a couple hours, one was a few days. So it is also an important element. The voice in his head, dude, giving me Venom PTSD a little bit. Like, that's going to take a little bit to get used to for me personally. What do you think about the voice so far?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't hate the voice. I thought there wasn't a lot of it, right? Like, if there's not a lot of it and it's injected in the right spots, it's good. Like, for me, it was interesting because I think it was finally started moving it along past Steven, right? Like, we're like, okay, what's going on here, right? And I think, especially because it's the first episode, it's clearly dedicated to the Steven Grant identity that he has. They got a lot out there, right? And I think for him, he's the clear most unstable one in this situation. Clearly is not having it at work. He gets a lot of heat for everything he's doing. He can't obviously keep track of what he's doing, to the point where he's locking himself in his room, like putting up tape to know if the door actually opens or not. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, he's all over the place.
I think I would have really liked if they would have started it in that like grass scene where his mouth is all bloody and it's like, what's going on? Like, it kind of gives you that Memento, Fight Club, Shutter Island feel, where you're like, I don't know what it gets you really confused, just like the character is. I really didn't like that museum manager. She kind of just seems mean for the sake of being mean, and which I'm not a fan of. The interesting note about the writer, Jeremy Slater, he's the head writer of this show, but he's only doing episode 1. So I think that'll be interesting to see as well. Like we've seen in Star Wars, how there's multiple writers, multiple directors, and their approach to this character, because it's a very fresh, new character for Marvel to play with.
Yeah, you know what? I was getting a lot of like Disney's version of like Deadpool in a sense. Like, there's a little taste there. It's because it's not a rated R show, right? So it's obviously limited in that capacity. But for the context and what you're allowed to get away with, or you get the middle finger from the driver in the other lane. Right. Just like some of the tone there, and kind of some of that action sequence too, especially like with the whole driving down the mountain, right? Like, I just got a lot of Deadpool feel there, which if they're going to keep pushing the boundary a little bit further, at the end there, you see the Moon Knight's villain just getting bashed in. Like, that's way further than
the Kanon monster.
So like you usually see your superheroes pulling punches most times, right? This is not going to be that type of person.
So I'm really glad that you brought that up about the elements and the tone, because one of the really good parts of this is I thought it had a lot of quirks to it. I really like the dissociative identity disorder that he has, and like how they portrayed that. It reminded me a ton of Doom Patrol, the show over on HBO with DC, and the character Jane. She kind of has a similar thing with his multiple personalities. And I also like that at times the show also felt lighthearted and fun, but it was also kind of scary at some moments. Like that hallway scene with the old lady, like that was very like cryptic, and it makes you very confused. Like they do a really good job at setting the tone. And I agree. Like I think we're gonna see this get a lot darker, a lot heavier than some of the other Marvel movies and television series. So yeah, I'm really, really excited. And we haven't mentioned it, but the music really is helping that too.
You brought up exactly what I wanted to say, and I think it was playing right into what I am talking about and what you're talking about, right? Like the tone is getting a little bit more darker, which I love, right? Like I said, It gave me a little bit of Deadpool feel, and I think that was an example of it, right? Like the kind of bouncing between them fighting, and then all of a sudden it's just back to Stephen Grant, and it's just this very mainstream back in the day song that you can get into, and you're just sitting there really enjoying it, right?
Bumping it,
and that was like one of the things that really made it. That's what really made me. That's what made me really sink in. That I felt the closest thing to Deadpool, at least from a Marvel property, that I've ever seen.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people make the comparison of Batman, but I think Deadpool is probably a more appropriate like similarity thing. There is definitely some Batman elements to this character that I think we'll see later on based on the comics. But I also thought it was just very cool too, like you said, like this monster is chasing him, and you're like, how is he gonna get out of this? And then Moon Knight, literally the monster's trying to escape him, and we don't get to see what he did or how he did it, but you just see him boom, 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 like almost kind of like Robert Pattinson's Batman a little bit, that scene where he's just like crushing them. And so, it's just Moon Knight looks like he's just nothing to mess with right now, man. What was your final takeaway from this episode number 1?
My final takeaway is I want to see more Mark Spector. I'm very intrigued by that. The overall character itself. But one little last taste I'll have as my little cherry on top. I'm starting to get a lot of Thanos vibes from this new villain, right? Kind of like we briefly talked about. He's almost trying to justify why he's doing what he's doing, in the sense of these people are ultimately going to be bad, so we need to get rid of them, right? And it's you're still killing people, right? It's like going back to Thanos and like, what if? It's still genocide, right? Like, so you can't do that. It's interesting to see how these villains, and I enjoy villains like this because they're the most over the top, right? It really gets you into the actual wanting to see the good guy prevail, right? So be on the lookout for this villain. I think it's gonna be a big one.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, is there's this sort of, we talk a little bit about this in Marvel, where there's like, are things destined to happen, or does it split off, right? And I think we don't necessarily know that. And what's interesting about Arthur Hall, he's like, we could have gotten rid of the Armenian genocide, we could have gotten rid of Hitler, but it's like, well, maybe your actions would have made someone else rise who was worse. So that's why you can't really have that happen. But what was your final score?
I would give it a solid 4.2 out of 5 right now. I really enjoyed that episode. I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch it. Maybe it changes, but initial reaction 4.2.
Yeah, so my initial reaction, I was like closer to a 3.9. I rewatched it, and I think this is definitely a show that you can't be like on your phone, like looking around, because there's a lot of details. And I recommend everyone go out for the first episode and watch this twice. And I would say this series probably could have benefited from a 2-episode release, but that being said, I would give it a 4.1 out of 5 to start. I was interested in the character development and the cinematography. I wasn't super blown away with how it ended, because I think we definitely need to see more of Moon Knight. It definitely makes you, it hooks you where you're like, what's gonna happen next? But I think I would have liked to see just a bit more of that character. All right, so that was episode 1 of Moon Knight. Go check out our key takeaways over on the Circle Club. Corey, let them know what's next.
Yeah, so next week, We got Moonlight episode 2. We're going to be reviewing it, seeing where it progresses, letting you guys know what we think. But as always, before you sign off, we appreciate you for watching. Subscribe to our channel, follow our socials, and make sure you're up to date, especially when it comes to next week and our next review. So, guys, stay tuned for what's next.